Hello, my name is Father Philip. I'm the vicar of Offenham Church. I'm going to be doing this little video tour around our church so that you can see the important parts of our building and what makes church buildings so special for Christians. So come on, follow me inside and we'll have a look around. So here we are just inside the church door, and I'm going to point out the first thing that you see when you come into a church. Now this is quite normal for a church of this age. If I just pan round, you can see behind me what's called the font. Now this is where christenings take place. It's what we do when someone is baptized. And it's a symbol of them becoming a member of the church. And that's one of the reasons why a font is usually near the door of a church, because it's a symbol of entering the church. So that's the first thing to see on our little tour. When we just go past the font, we come to the bell tower. Now, if I just pan down a bit, you can see the ropes that are used for bell ringing. Now, they're all tied up at the moment, but when the bell ringers come in, they take those down and the ropes go all the way up to the top of the tower where the bells are. Now, these days, a lot of bell ringers just ring bells for fun. It's a hobby, but it also has a very important part in the life of the church. It's what we use on Sunday mornings to let the village know that a service is about to begin. And bell ringers often ring the bells at other important times of the year as a way of marking special occasions. Now, just behind me, you can see one of the stained glass windows in our church. And we're very lucky here to have some really beautiful stained glass windows that we can look at. Now, in this video, you might not be able to see quite what the detail is behind me, but these are actually pictures of Moses and Joshua, who were important prophets of the Old Testament. Long time ago, when very few people learned how to read and write, stained glass windows in churches were a really important way of telling stories from the Bible and teaching people about the Christian faith. And we still have some of these stories told in our windows today. So I'm standing here now in the middle of the church, and you can see behind me the seats where people sit when they come to join in with a service. These seats have a special name. They're called pews. Now, what we have in this part of the church is a special symbol, and I'm going to try and explain what that means. This bit of the church, which is where everyone sits, is called the nave. Now, you might think that word sounds quite similar to another word that we use today called navy, which is all about ships. Now, actually, the two words are linked. If I just pan down, you can see the roof above me like that. Now, if you think about a really old-fashioned wooden ship, the roof at the church looks a little bit like a ship that's been turned upside down and dropped on top of the church. Now that's deliberate. It's meant to make us think about the story of Noah's Ark, when all the animals went into the ark and were safe from the flood. So the nave of the church is designed to remind us of that story, that here in church, we're safe under the protection of God. I'm here at the other end of the church now, and if I just pan down a little bit, you might just be able to make out just about here where you're looking, there is a step up. Now, steps up in churches, particularly old churches like this one, have a particular meaning. When you step up into a place in a church, it means that you're entering a slightly holier bit of the church. And I'll try to explain a little bit about what that means. So just behind me here, you can see what is called the vicar's stall. This is where I sit when I'm leading worship. And if I just pan round, there is on the other side what's called the deacon's stall. So anyone who is assisting me with worship will sit there. And if I pan round a little bit further, you can see that there are some benches on either side. And when a choir is singing, this is where they sit. So up here on this bit of the church, which is called the chancel, this is where all the people who are leading worship will sit on a Sunday morning. Now behind me here is what is called the sanctuary, and you can see the table behind me. This is what we call the altar. Now you'll notice again that there are more steps up. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we're going into another bit of the church, which is considered to be a holy part of the building. Now you might be able to see behind me that there is what's called a communion rail. This is where people come along and they kneel to receive communion when we are having a communion service on a Sunday morning. Now, fun fact, communion rails originally weren't designed for people to kneel at to receive communion. They were actually designed to keep animals away from the altar. A long time ago, very often church buildings were open and local farm animals would wander into the church. And so these barriers used to be there to try and keep the animals out of the holiest bit of the building. Here I am in the sanctuary, and you can see a little bit behind me where the altar is. And this is where we do our worship when we're having a Holy Communion service. Now I'm just going to set up the table so you can see a little bit about the things we use when we have a communion service. Holy Communion is one of the most important things that we do in church during our worship. This is the time when we remember Jesus at the Last Supper, sharing bread and wine with his disciples. So that's what we do as well. We Christians are also disciples of Jesus, and when we gather together for our worship, we share bread and wine and remember Jesus. So probably the most important part of my job as a vicar is leading people in worship and making sure that they can have Holy Communion. So that's probably my main role. I do all sorts of other things as well though. Part of my job is about looking after everyone in the community and making sure that they are taken care of. And that can mean all sorts of different things: doing weddings, doing christenings, doing funerals, going to visit people, coming into school and leading assemblies, and all sorts of other things that I do. Now, there are lots of other people in church who do other roles as well, and they help me out. So you might know Father Timothy. He's one of the assistant priests in our benefice, and he helps me with my job. But there are other roles as well. In this church, there are church wardens, there's a treasurer, there's other people who belong to the church council. They help to maintain and look after this fabulous building and make sure that it's kept well maintained and clean. They also look after the churchyard and make sure that everything is kept in good order, and make sure that we are able to pay our bills and keep everything going so that this church is available for future generations. So it's really a team effort. I think a lot of people think that it's just the vicar here on their own, as I am at the moment, but actually there's lots of people involved in running a church. One of the most important volunteers are our organists. So Hilary is the organist here, and you can see the organ behind me. So this is a really important part of our worship, accompanying people as they sing our hymns. And just behind there, you can just see a little door. That's the door through to the vestry, and that's where I go and get changed into special clothing before I lead worship. Part of that worship includes what we call preaching, or preaching a sermon. And you can see behind me, there is the pulpit, where sometimes I will go if I'm going to preach a sermon to the people. It's raised up again. Now, do you remember what steps meant? Well, going up into the pulpit is a sign that you are about to preach about God and tell people about things to do with the Bible and their Christian faith. And it's also raised up so that in the times before we had microphones and ways of making things louder, you could hear what the preacher was saying all the way down at the back of church. Now, the last little bit that I'm going to talk about here is our kitchen. Now, that might sound a bit strange. Not all churches have kitchens, but actually hospitality, making sure that people have food and drink and space to share together in their lives and to be able to make friends, is a really important part of church life. It makes church much more welcoming if people can have a cup of tea or coffee and some biscuits after a service and catch up with their friends. So hospitality is another really important part of church life. So there we go. That's our little tour of Offenham Church. I hope you found this useful, and I hope it will give you lots of things to talk about in your lesson. See you again soon. Bye.